I'm afraid to go to the heart of my mind. A phrase you might have told yourself or thought about once before in your life. We all have pasts we're running away from, demons we're battling against, wounds that have yet to heal. We don't even realize what we're carrying are unresolved traumas. Deep down, you know the things you've experienced are far from ordinary. At the very core of your mind lie painful memories you've been subconsciously suppressing. Memories you thought were locked away come surfacing with even the smallest triggers. It could be something as harmless as seeing an alcohol bottle, hearing the sounds of heavy footsteps, or being reminded of how your mother spoke to you through the words of another. These things might be meaningless to others, but to you, they carry weight. And the hardest part is, most of the time, you don't even understand why you're reacting this way to something so insignificant. Desperation comes and you scramble trying to find an answer, leading you to seek other people's opinions. And what do they tell you? Some people have it worse than you. Be thankful that you're in a better place than them. Your mind is torn between believing the words you hear from others and believing in the pain you've once felt. So how would you confront a wound that you're not even sure is real, as the only option to wait for a savior and tell you that you're not fine? Or is there a way to uncover these wounds on our own? There's an anime you may have heard of that portrays the experience of unresolved trauma. Erased, also known as The Town Where Only I Am Missing. While the story centers on Satoru, the main character, the heart of the trauma narrative belongs to Hinazuki, a young girl who suffers not only from physical abuse, but also becomes a victim of kidnapping and murder. Satoru is haunted by guilt, knowing he could have saved Hinazuki the night before her tragic death. If only he'd asked her to walk home with him. His hesitation cost Hinazuki her life. As time passes, Satoru discovers he has the ability to rewind time by a few minutes to prevent disasters. But one day, this ability goes beyond its usual limits, sending him back to his middle school days, 1 month before Hinazuki's kidnapping. Determined to change the future, Satoru vows to prevent her death. He uncovers a darker reality. Hinazuki's home life is nothing but a nightmare. She endures relentless physical abuse from her mother, while her stepfather passively watches, treating her like a punching bag. Hinazuki has become emotionally numb, quietly enduring her mother's cruelty without complaint. Yet in the story, there's more to consider than the wounds that we can see. What's equally important are the unseen scars, the emotional and psychological damage that people often overlook. But first, let's talk about physical abuse. Sometimes it's quite easy to tell people who suffered from such abuse. If you had been used as a doormat as a child, of course you'd suffer bruises and wounds. And even if the victims of their parents themselves try their best to hide the bruises by, for example in Hinazuki's case, making them wear thick and long clothes, you can notice a difference in their behavior. Different than the rest of their peers. Different from how a child would normally act. Imagine looking at a child, seeing not the sparkle of innocence in their eyes, but the awareness of an adult who has already faced unimaginable suffering. Hinazuki, as a result of enduring the abuse, had grown emotionally numb and isolated herself from her classmates, spending her time alone in the park until night because she didn't want to face her mother's wrath again. If it means delaying her inevitable punishment, she would rather risk the dangers of the night as a child than go home. And if you think about it, it's really messed up how the outside world is much safer than Hinazuki's own home. People you thought would guide you, nurture you, and comfort you were the very ones responsible for breaking you. It's not just a wound that hurts. It betrays everything a child should expect from home. And it really shows. That's why Satoru and his friend Kenya noticed something was wrong with Hinazuki, cold, antisocial, and writing poems as a cry for help. But what about the other kinds of wounds or bruises that aren't as visible? What about those who are overshadowed by people with struggles that are perceived and acknowledged more? What of the victims of emotional abuse? Some say that emotional abuse isn't real abuse, that words alone couldn't harm a person. And if they do, then they're labeled as a snowflake. But is that really right? To this day, I question why people can't just recognize the fact that words, even if you're not inflicting physical damage, can hurt people. And forgive me for saying this, but it's especially prevalent in Asian countries such as mine. I've witnessed and heard some things other parents tell their children. Things like, "You will starve to death without me. You have no idea how much it hurt me to hurt you. You have no right to cry because we provide you with a roof over your head, food on your plate, and clothes that you wear." These lines are some of the things I've heard coming from other parents, and I really can't say more than that as it gets more graphic. But it gives you an idea of how normalized this way of parenting is. And tell me, are these words the things you say to a child who barely know anything? Telling them that they would die without their parents and threatening their own children that their parents would leave just because they misbehaved a little, and then telling their children that what they feel is irrelevant because children's problems couldn't compare to the problems of their parents. The sad part about all of this is children, at least the ones I've seen, grow up thinking this is the norm, turning into young adults with a lot of unresolved issues, with it happening all over the world. What's even more depressing is that children who can tolerate such emotional abuse are labeled as mature for their age, being praised because they can rationalize and carry their own emotional burdens by themselves. But this isn't something that should be glorified. Why are people praising something that is the result of mistreatment? A child isn't supposed to act something they aren't. They should be playing, exploring their curiosities, and finding out who they want to become. Yet they're forced to act like an adult because of the people who pushed them to be, just so they can survive. But I really can't speak for everyone here. Victims of abuse have their own experiences, and unresolved trauma doesn't only come from childhood abuse, whether it may be physical, emotional, or other forms of abuse. But one common thread among all victims of abuse is the eventual realization of the horrors they endured. Years of thinking that what you went through is nothing but an obstacle from life that you have to conquer. Believing it's something everyone must go through. But then you found out how other people live their lives. In security, in comfort, and in belonging. Everything that you thought was right is flipped. A part of your life stolen from you, leaving you with a bitter pill to swallow. There's one scene in the anime that actually portrays this experience. Satoru decided to let Hinazuki stay over the night to avoid her fated death, so they slept the night away, and when Hinazuki woke up, she was greeted with what seemed a very ordinary breakfast. But as she was staring the food down, tears started flowing out, holding back the urge to cry but failing to do so. It turns out that at that moment, memories of how she spends every morning of her life come rushing through her head. A piece of bread, a cup of instant noodles, 200 yen, being provided with the absolute bare minimum by her parents just to make sure she keeps breathing. And what's more frustrating is that her parents don't seem to be struggling financially. They weren't poor, they just didn't care. Her wounds were not only physical but also mental. And it was only when she got a taste of normalcy that she realized how f***ed up her whole life was. That's why she broke down over something so simple, because all she ever knew was to live her life on constant edge, calculating her every action so that she might not accidentally trigger her mom's wrath, learning how to act and hide her pain away so that others might not notice, because she knows that if someone does, her mother will make sure Hinazuki will regret it. And that's why all it took was a bit of kindness and warmth for wounds she didn't know was there to show up and break her. A sense of normalcy is what these victims lack. Or rather, they have a false sense of normalcy. Even if you're not aware that you were simply adapting and adjusting to the abnormal situations you had, your mind was conditioned to believe that it was truly the norm. But I'm sure there were times you questioned it all, asking yourself things like, am I supposed to feel like this? Is this what truly love is? Why couldn't they offer just a bit of sympathy? And yet you shove these thoughts aside because you were told you were just overreacting. Why is it that we let others decide how we feel? But I think a better question is, why do we believe them? You should be the one in control of what you feel and what you believe. And yet they have the power to make you think otherwise because you're vulnerable, taking advantage of your every weakness, using them against you, asserting their superiority over you, making nowhere safe, not even your own home. A place that is supposed to be your quiet sanctuary, a place where you can express yourself with no judgment, a place to shield you from the stress and dangers of the outside world, becomes a place that is the cause of your suffering. And so what happens when you don't have a place you can confide in? You become restless, merely surviving day by day instead of truly living, unable to explore the other areas of life because you are too damaged to risk something new. Tell me, would you risk getting yourself hurt, knowing you don't have the capacity to heal yourself? Without a safe space, you can't try anything. Something as simple as rejection or failure becomes as painful as a stab in the chest, because you're not in the right state of mind to handle such things. And that's why Hinazuki never tried anything. Like a piece of glass, all it takes is one mistake to break. She was stuck, unable to do anything, while her actions were limited. And that's why she chose to carry this burden alone, without the comfort of a safe space. Escaping the torture she's been put in was nothing but a dream. She's forever bound to this perpetual cycle of inaction and punishment until the day she takes her last breath. That's until Satoru came along to undo his mistakes. He made sure to never make the mistake of leaving her alone again, and tried every day to get closer to her despite her initial cold attitude. Playing detective, moving her out of harm's direction, unknowingly saving her in another way. Satoru wasn't just preventing a tragedy, but he was saving her soul, showing her that she was not alone anymore. He stood up for her when she was getting picked on, including her in his own circle, giving her precious memories that she'll treasure, providing warmth even in the coldest of night. And most importantly, him just simply being there for her. And it made all the difference. And you, what about you? In your years of being misunderstood, you believe that your burdens were only yours to carry, that you have to be strong for yourself. But haven't you once thought that maybe you've been strong for way too long? You think that if you crumble, no one's going to pick up the shattered pieces of yourself. That's why you can't afford to fall. You have to be strong. But isn't that more the reason why we need people? You already have it hard enough, so there's no need to carry all these burdens by yourself. You need genuine connections, support systems, friends that'll be there for you and listen to you, just as you will for them. Because life gets easier when you're surrounded by people you care about as they care about you. You need to break the cycle of inaction and torture that your traumas bound you to, so don't be afraid. And that's what Hinazuki came to understand. Satoru was able to save her from her own mother, as it was revealed why she kept on doing this. It turns out she was using Hinazuki for emotional relief because her husband used to beat her up all the time, revealing another case of generational trauma. But even still, Satoru was able to break the cycle. Bit by bit, Hinazuki realized that even if the darkness of the night sky stretches on endlessly, there will always be a distant star shining its light, making its way toward you. All you have to do is to reach out and traverse the darkness, no matter how suffocating, no matter how confusing. As long as you find your way to them, there will always be someone waiting for you, accepting you, and all the wounds you didn't know you had. If you made it this far, then thank you for sticking around to hear my thoughts. I want to say that everything I shared is based on my personal experiences and opinions. If you disagree, then that's totally okay. I don't claim to have all the answers. I just wanted to open a dialogue about these topics. And if you feel like the burdens you carry now are getting too much to handle and there's no one to listen to, then tell me how you feel down with a comment and I'll try my best to read them. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then I have another one for you right here. That's it for this one, and I'll see you in the next video.